Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really complex place, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC. It's this incredible paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hugely rich in resources, but consistently, among the poorest and most conflict-affected nations globally. So our mission today is to try and unpack that. We've got stacks of research here, history, economics, human rights reports, the lot. We really want to explore how the DRC, with all this potential, ended up where it is today and what its story tells us maybe about power, resources, and, well, human dignity.
Yeah, and it's such a stark example, the DRC's journey of this thing people call the resource curse or the paradox of plenty. You really see how having all this wealth, this natural abundance, has actually, in many ways, become a huge obstacle. It sort of invites exploitation, invites conflict, rather than bringing prosperity, which is just tragic, really.
Okay, so let's lay some groundwork, get a sense of the scale, because this country is genuinely massive, second largest in Africa.
Huge.
We're talking over 2.3 million square kilometers. That's what?
Wow.
Nearly 30 times the size of France.
Yeah, and slightly bigger than all of Western Europe put together. It's vast.
Geographically, you've got the Great Lakes and Mount Rwenzori over in the east, the Kasai River, the Atlantic coast, the Nile Basin up north. It's incredibly diverse. And population-wise, over 64 million people. That makes it the fourth most populous in Africa. Kinshasa, the capital, has around 6 million people itself.
And you mentioned complexity. Even the name tells a story, doesn't it? It's had 5 different names since independence.
5!
Yeah, reflecting these huge shifts in who's in charge, what the national identity is supposed to be, Democratic Republic of the Congo, République Démocratique du Congo, RDC Zaire. Each name is really tied to specific leaders. Moise Tshom, Kasavubu, Mobutu, Laurent Kabila, and then his son, Joseph Kabila.
It's like layers of history just in the name. And going way back before any of that, thousands of years ago, this area wasn't empty. You had agriculture starting up, people settling by rivers and lakes. They developed fishing, hunting, barter trade.
Complex societies were forming.
Exactly. And then you get groups like the ancestors of the Bantu peoples, the Pygmies arriving, mixing, leading to these agrarian communities and eventually, actual states, trade networks. There are even these old legends, Barua's curse, Mazembe, suggesting really deep historical roots tied to specific places like Kinshasa.
And connecting that deep past to more recent history, the colonial era just fundamentally changed everything for the DRC. It's crucial to remember Congolese civilization was thriving way back, like the 12th century. These complex kingdoms existed. But then the 19th century hits and European explorers arrive, driven largely by one man's ambition, King Leopold II of Belgium.
Right, and this is where it gets incredibly dark. Leopold had the stated goal, this sort of dual justification.
Worldly and divine thing, yeah.
Gather riches, but also civilize Africans. But the reality, it was just brutal, transforming these functioning kingdoms into what even early observers, missionaries, other explorers called a state of chaos and cruelty. It really stained Belgium's reputation, didn't it, permanently?
Absolutely, yeah. And a key moment is 1885. The creation of the Congo Free State.
Yeah.
Now, internationally, this was sold as a noble venture, a public charitable work meant to stop the slave trade.
Sounds good on paper.
Sounds great. But behind that, it was Leopold's insatiable thirst for wealth, just pure greed. And the human cost was astronomical. And the structure was bizarre. It was literally his private property for 23 years, the whole country.
Just unbelievable, his personal fiefdom. And then in 1908, Belgium formally annexed it. It became the Belgian Congo. But did the exploitation change much?
Not fundamentally, no.
Yeah.
The model was already set. The colonial administration actively worked to weaken any central power, annexing kingdoms one by one, so local elites faded, power got really decentralized, and crucially, no effective new system of governance really replaced what was destroyed. That absence of effective rule would haunt the country later.
So fast forward. Leopold II's last move before Belgium took over was, ironically, setting the stage for independence, which finally happened June 30th, 1960. But picture this. The guys appointed as ministers, many of them were super young. They had almost no real government experience, just completely unprepared.
Right. And it begs the question, what did independence really mean then? You had this initial push for nationhood coming from a small elite group. But then, boom, universal suffrage hits.
Yeah.
And you get these mass political movements exploding onto the scene, everything from sort of social democracy to full-on Bolshevik communism, sometimes with riots, violence.
A real pressure cooker.
Totally. And the Congolese people, they expected to run their own show, right? Maybe with a little bit of help from the Belgians. Minimal help was the hope. But that just wasn't how it played out.
No. And the chaos just got worse, especially after Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister, was violently killed in January 1961. That just opened the floodgates. You had rival factions fighting, often with foreign backing. It was just mayhem. By late 1965, the government had, get this, 48 ministers and deputy ministers. 48.
How could anything get done?
Exactly. Impossible to make decisions effectively. A direct result of that kind of rushed, unprepared independence. And this chaos creates an opening for one figure who would dominate the DRC for decades. Joseph Mobutu. In 1965, 5 years after Lumumba, Mobutu grabs power, overthrows Mobutu in a bloody coup.
And Mobutu's regime, 32 years. It became synonymous with some of the worst human rights abuses in Africa, period. Under him, the country renamed Zaire was apparently second only to Soviet Russia in terms of reported abuses. It was a deeply corrupt dictatorship, rigged elections, one-party rule, a whole package.
Yeah, he moved fast. Immediately revoked the constitution, made himself head of government, declared this no-party system. He just centralized everything, crushed opposition, muzzled the press. He even did that bizarre authenticity campaign, the muzzle stage.
Forcing people to change their names to more African ones, right? But it was really about control.
Total control, asserting his personal dominance over everything, even identity. And his government relied on these brutal state security forces. We're talking extrajudicial killings, torture, excessive force, prisons that were just inhuman. And he was paranoid. Didn't even trust his own loyal advisors after a while, which just made the human rights situation even worse. Eventually, though, pressure built up. Mobutu was forced into some gradual political reforms, and that basically weakened his grip enough for the whole thing to collapse. So 1996, a rebel coalition led by Laurent Désiré Kabila, who came back from exile, sweeps across the country. Mobutu's out. Kabila declares himself president. Mobutu flees in 97, dies in exile. And Kabila arrives in Kinshasa initially as this kind of hero figure.
Yeah, a moment of hope, maybe. But it was very short-lived. The challenges were immediate and immense. Because overthrowing Mobutu, while necessary, didn't bring peace. It actually plunged the country into an even worse, more complex civil war, a war that sucked at neighboring countries. It kicked off when Tutsi groups within the DRC rebelled against Kabila. That escalated into the First Congo War. You had neighbors piling in, various ethnic militias fighting Kabila's forces, who also had their own allies, just a massive regional conflict.
And the human cost was immense. Millions of civilians died in that First Congo War, and then Kabila himself was assassinated in 2001.
Right, and his son, Joseph Kabila, gets appointed president. But the fighting didn't stop.
Oh.
That just set the stage for the Second Congo War. This one starting around 1998, often called the Great African War.
Mm-hmm.
And the scale is just horrifying, considered the deadliest conflict globally since World War II, sometimes called Africa's First World War. Estimates are around 2 million people killed directly in the fighting. Another 2 million fled as refugees.
Just mind-boggling numbers. And the war itself started dramatically, right? August 1st, 2nd, 1998. Banyamulenge rebels, backed by Rwanda and Uganda, tried to take Kinshasa itself.
Yeah, direct assault. It failed. They were pushed back from the capital, but they captured huge swaths of territory in the east. And that's when other countries got pulled in deeper. Angola, Zimbabwe, Namibia came in to help Kabila's government fight back.
So the scale just kept growing.
Absolutely. At its peak, you might have had something like 300,000 to 500,000 troops involved from all sides. And one of the most horrific aspects, the use of child soldiers. Kids kidnapped, brainwashed, sent to the front lines is just cannon fodder. It's sickening.
And even when the war officially ended, the dying didn't stop, did it?
Not at all. That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Millions more have died since the formal peace accords. The International Rescue Committee had those shocking reports, over 1,000 civilians still dying every single day in the Congo. Not from bullets mostly, but from preventable stuff. Malnutrition, disease, because the whole economic and social fabric just collapsed.
The infrastructure, the health systems, gone.
Exactly. And this war just shattered the region. Any stability that had been achieved in Central and Southern Africa after the Cold War, gone. You had the hangover from the Rwandan genocide. You had Mobutu's decades of mismanagement creating this powder keg. And everyone jumped in. Uganda, Tanzania, Chad, Sudan, Burundi, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Angola, Libya. There were even reports mentioning Cubans, Iraqis.
A free-for-all.
It really was a scramble for the Congo, Part 2. Regional powers trying to gain influence, grab resources, get diplomatic wins, leading to just chaos and weakening states all around the DRC too.
Which brings us back to those resources. All this fighting, the suffering, and underlying it all is this staggering wealth. It's the core of the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Over 1,100 known minerals and resources. The world's biggest cobalt deposits, crucial for our phones, our electric cars. Massive amounts of diamonds, gold, coltan, copper, uranium, oil, timber. Plus, what, 2/3 of Africa's rainforests are there?
Incredible wealth on paper. Which makes the next question so stark. Why? Why is a country with that much natural wealth still one of the absolute poorest, ranking 143rd out of 145 on the Global Hunger Index in 2020?
It's baffling.
It is. And this is the resource curse in action. It's when that wealth, instead of lifting people up, actually fuels conflict, invites corruption, attracts predatory actors, especially when you have weak government institutions that can't manage it properly or transparently.
And the numbers show it. Chronic underdevelopment everywhere. 70% of people living on less than $1 a day. 12 million kids not in school. Maternal mortality through the roof. It's just this awful picture. Extreme poverty, terrible malnutrition, economic stagnation or decline. People constantly displaced, armed violence. A whole constellation of indicators of misery, as one source put it.
And what's so galling is that this exploitation isn't new. It's basically continued nonstop since Leopold's time. Through the Belgian colonial era, through Mobutu Zaire, through the Kabilas, the pattern repeats. The Congolese people themselves haven't benefited. Instead, they see their forests cut down for palm oil, their lakes become battlegrounds for diamond miners leaving toxic sludge behind.
Yeah, it's stunning. You mentioned diamonds and cobalt. The DRC is the world leader in industrial diamonds, holds most of the world's cobalt. Yet mining makes up only 0.2% of GDP.
0.2%. It's unbelievable.
And mineral exporters pay just a 2% tax. That's nothing.
It's ridiculously low. And it shows the state's inability or unwillingness to capture that wealth for its people. That failure fuels everything. It shapes the whole political economy. So many of the conflicts are literally about controlling those mineral-rich areas because that's where the money is, even if it's illicit money.
And the leadership hasn't tackled the illegal mining, the artisanal mines where conditions are horrific. Largely failed to. You have corrupt officials, weak enforcement. It just perpetuates this system where miners risk their lives for almost nothing, trapped in poverty. The total lack of transparency, the deep-seated corruption, this whole black market way of doing things involving both Congolese actors and foreign interests, it just turns the blessing of resources into this endless curse of conflict.
And the societal impact beyond the economy is just devastating. We're talking about a country that's lived through genocide, massacres, systematic killings, rape used systematically as a weapon of war, constant looting. You look at any indicator, unemployment, malnutrition, child mortality is always near the bottom. That phrase, constellation of indicators of misery, really hits home.
And look at basic infrastructure. Roads, out of maybe 153,000 kilometers, only about 3,700 are paved, less than 3%.
The railways, mostly built by the Belgians, haven't been maintained. They're falling apart. And then there's the corruption bleeding funds away. One estimate suggested over $1 billion siphoned off just through inflated government construction contracts, ending up in officials' pockets or their families.
$1 billion. That could transform healthcare, couldn't it? Which is also in a terrible state.
Grim is the word. 1 in 10 kids dies before age 1, 1 in 5 before age 5. Over 45,000 women die every year from pregnancy complications. The government spends, what, $5 per person per year on health? It's nothing. The system has basically collapsed. Shortages of everything, constant outbreaks, cholera, malaria, typhus, and the wars destroyed so many clinics and hospitals. So people end up going to, informal drug sellers, traditional healers, priests, because the official system is seen as completely rotten.
And education sounds just as bad.
Very similar picture. Over half of men are illiterate, even more women. Universities were shut down under Mobutu, academics chased away. It created this total vacuum, as one source called it, in training people to actually govern. Reforms have been piecemeal or failed. Sometimes schools were even used more for political control than for actual education.
So with all that, poverty, conflict, collapsed systems, what about democracy? Joseph Kabila's election in 2006 was seen as a big step, right?
Wow.
Peaceful transfer of power, hope after the war.
It was hailed as that, definitely. A moment of real hope for stability.
But then concerns kept cropping up about later elections, didn't they? Because the political and economic stakes are just so high, the interests are so entrenched.
It highlights that just holding regular multi-party elections doesn't automatically mean you have real democracy. Not if the process isn't fair or if it's constantly threatened by instability. How does genuine democracy take root in that kind of environment? It's a huge question.
It really is. But amidst all this darkness, there are unique aspects, right? There's resilience.
Absolutely. There's an incredibly rich cultural heritage, even with the scars of colonialism. You see this interesting mix of myth and reality in everyday life. Kinshasa has these amazing Art Nouveau buildings, remnants of a different era. And culturally, there's Kimbanguism.
The religious movement.
Yeah, linked to Simon Kimbangu, who was a key figure in the early anti-colonial resistance back in the 20th century. Is a really significant part of the cultural identity for many Congolese.
And surely there's potential in things like tourism, with the rivers, the rainforests, the culture.
Enormous potential,
Hmm.
but largely untapped because of the instability and lack of infrastructure. You could have amazing adventure tourism, ecotourism, think gorillas in Virunga, cultural tourism, celebrating the diversity.
Hmm.
If developed carefully, that could genuinely help tackle unemployment and poverty, provide alternative livelihoods.
That makes sense.
And looking ahead, another factor is the youth bulge, a huge young population increasingly connected through social media. Now, that's both a challenge and an opportunity, isn't it? Social media can mobilize voters, which is good for democracy in theory, but it's also fertile ground for disinformation, fake news, hate speech, especially around election time. So building digital literacy, especially for young voters, is critical to protect democracy and development.
So internationally, peace talks like the ones in Pretoria led to some agreements, transitional governments.
Yeah, symbolic steps forward.
Yeah.
But the underlying problems, the history of infighting, the neighbor exploiting resources, the wealth flowing out to foreign interests, those haven't gone away. It reinforces this struggle for real stability, real governance that serves the Congolese people. The DRC has often felt like the least of nations, kind of abandoned by the world despite sitting on all this wealth everyone wants.
Okay, so wrapping this up, thinking about everything we've discussed, what's the takeaway for someone listening? This deep dive really shows a nation with just staggering potential, but it's constantly overshadowed by its own wealth, paradoxically. From Leopold's brutal private ownership through Belgian colonization, Mobutu's tyranny, the horrific Congo wars, it's just this relentless story. Exploitation, instability, suffering, all happening alongside these incredible resources and, importantly, incredibly resilient people.
And it forces that question again, how? How can a place so rich in cobalt, diamonds, gold, coltan be so poor? How can its people endure crisis after crisis? It really points to that toxic mix. The legacy of outside interference, yes, but also deep internal problems, corruption, failures of governance that have turned the natural bounty into this curse.
Yeah. And the feeling of isolation, of being forgotten by the world, seems to have stalled progress for so long. But the sources we looked at really emphasize that international attention matters. And maybe more importantly, a fundamental shift is needed, moving away from just extracting resources for the benefit of a few, towards actually using that wealth to improve people's lives, health, education, infrastructure. That seems absolutely crucial.
It does. And maybe the final thought is this. The DRC's story isn't just about the DRC. It forces us to look at the global systems. How does our demand for minerals in our phones and cars connect to what happens there? What responsibility does the global community have when historical injustices and bad governance trap a nation in this cycle? It makes you think about our own consumption, doesn't it? And what real fair trade or ethical sourcing should look like when the stakes are this high.
A really powerful point to leave people with. We hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, maybe more nuanced view of this incredibly important but often overlooked part of our world. Until next time, keep digging deeper.